I tend to forget,
Jai
but I
Hind,
have covered your.
uh, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. Sorry about that. Uh, today's topic is very interesting. आज का जो हमने एक 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 हमने बात करनी है इस संडे आफ्टरनून में. आज हम लोग जो बात कर रहे हैं, जो कश्मीर एक बोलते हैं ना दलदल में फंस गया था, एक ट्रैप में फंस गया था, जिसका नाम था इस्लामाइजेशन. और वो कहाँ से आया, उसकी क्या स्टोरी है, वो उसके बारे में बहुत लोग बात कर चुके हैं. एवरीबडी स्पोकन अबाउट इट. वी नो पाकिस्तान का हाथ क्या है, वी नो इंटरनल पॉलिटिक्स का क्या हाथ है उसके अंदर. वो सब चीज़ें हमको पता है. मेरे को आज जो बात करनी है, व्हाट इज़ द ग्राउंड सिचुएशन इन कश्मीर, लोग क्या सोच रहे हैं. और दूसरी चीज़ कि इसका जो एक हम लोग जो भारत ने एक जगह से इसको हैंडल किया है, क्या वो अभी तक इफेक्टिव है, और आगे हमको क्या करना है उसके अंदर. सी दैट इज़ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, क्योंकि हमको देखना है आपका जो भी एक प्लान हुआ है वो आज तक कहाँ पहुंचा है. ठीक है, बहुत लोग बोल सकते हो ठीक नहीं है, ये नहीं है, डंडे मारने चाहिए. कई लोग बोलते हो कि बोलते हैं कि नहीं नहीं, थोड़ा सॉफ्ट हैंड से करना चाहिए. देयर आर लॉट ऑफ डिबेट्स अबाउट दिस. तो आइए देखते हैं. मेरे साथ हैं वन ऑफ द मोस्ट renowned voices as a matter of fact on this particular subject, मिस आरशिया मलिक. एंड शी इज रिटन सम वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग स्टफ. मैं इनको काफ़ी फॉलो करता हूँ जब मेरे को इन चीज़ों के बारे में पढ़ना होता है, विच इज़ क्वाइट ऑफन एज अ मैटर फैक्ट. बट आई हैव स्पोकन टू हर वंस बिफोर, जब हमने एक वी स्पोक अबाउट अ जनरल प्रिंसिपल हमने बात करी थी, बट अ स्ट्रेटेजिक वैल्यू के हिसाब से बात करी थी इसके बारे में. सो आज भी लेट्स सी वेयर दिस कॉन्वर्सेशन टेक्स अस. इज गोना बी इंटरेस्टिंग, बिकॉज कश्मीर एक ऐसी जगह है जहां पर चीजें बदलती हुई दिख रही हैं ऑन द ग्राउंड. अब वो सुपरफिशियल है कि राइट डाउन टू द रूट है, लेट्स फाइंड आउट. So first of all, thank you so much for joining me for another podcast. And the idea would be to learn, to interact, and देखते हैं what comes out of it, because at the end of it, Kashmir is a very sensitive subject for the region itself. ठीक है. And today the voices on Kashmir जो बोलते हैं ना, दो आवाजें निकल रही हैं उसके अंदर से. एक है इंडिया की आवाज, भारत की आवाज जो आ रही है, which is the Kashmiri voice which is coming out and saying टीटरिंग टू द राइट थिंग, मतलब जो ठीक चीजें भी बोलनी शुरू हो गए हैं. और एक है आपका पीओके में, जहां पर भी बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग डेवलपमेंट्स हो रही हैं. सो लेट्स टॉक अबाउट दैट. व्हाट डू यू थिंक इज हैपनिंग ऑन द ग्राउंड, पहले ये बताइए.
Thank you for having me, Adi, and wonderful to be on your channel again. I have also started following it because for me, geopolitics happens to be a hobby kind of. It makes sense to my own work as well. We've just celebrated 15th August, right? And if you've seen the visuals, it's been a big, big change. For me, I've written about it. It's like what we used to have in my childhood. The 80s. The last time we had a normal Independence Day was 1987, when
Hmm.
for the school parade, we went. The contingents were there, floats were there, and uh, lots of fervor. And immediately 88, 89, 90, it was curfews on 15th August and all. So I think your viewers can also figure out that it's a lot of change. But skeptic that I am, I am still,
Must be. Must
quite
be.
realistic. And we can't say everything is fine. There's a lot of work to be done. I've written about it. The battle may have been won, but the war is, a long way off. You still have to win the war.
मैं तो
As
ये
you
भी
said,
बोलूंगा कि बैटल
Islamization.
अभी भी
Yeah.
चल रही है.
Huh?
बैटल इज स्टिल ऑन. आई विल से बैटल अभी भी
Okay.
चल रही है. सो
And it's
आई
going to take decades,
हाँ.
decades. एक बार जब इस्लामिज्म का वायरस घुस जाता है, I mean, generations have been radicalized. And it's not just the people who picked up guns, it's the ones who have extremist views, and this othering of non-Muslims. That will take a lot of time to eradicate.
हम्म. सो लेट्स टॉक अबाउट द पीपल. देखिए, अभी दो तीन चीज आपने भी बोली, जो 15th अगस्त को हमने जो विजुअल्स देखे, व्हाट वी सॉ देयर, बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग विजुअल्स थे. जो चीजें पहले, आई मीन आई एम ऑल्सो ऑफ अ सर्टेन एज, मैं भी देख रहा हूँ काफी टाइम से क्या हो रहा है वहां पर. आई एम फ्रॉम एन आर्म फोर्सेस फैमिली, तो हमको ऑब्वियसली पता चलता था. एंड दूसरी चीज, वी बीन पोस्टेड अराउंड इन दैट रीजन, तो काफी कुछ न्यूज भी आती थी. इट वॉजंट वेरी पॉजिटिव. कोई जाना नहीं चाहता था वहां पर. जम्मू रीजन फिर भी चले आते थे लोग, बट नोबडी वांटेड टू गो टू दैट कश्मीर एरिया. आज आपका क्या ख्याल है? I mean, what do you think people are wanting to go there at least?
Yes, the first thing about 15th August was we were expecting the usual, restrictions like, and then Bakshi Stadium is in Srinagar city where you have all of these parades and things happening. It used to be a lot of security, frisking. That's the first part. And
Hmm.
I have the darkest period, the darkest memories in my mind in 1990s. We used to have snipers since we had a huge house. तो टॉप फ्लोर पे वो परमिशन लेके स्नाइपर प्लेस हो जाता था बिकॉज इट ओवरलुक्स द बख्शी स्टेडियम सो दैट यूज्ड टू बी द फर्स्ट इंडिकेशन कि 15th है एंड
बड़ा ही
15th से
इंटरेस्टिंग
पहले ही
लोकेशन था.
द वीक 10 days before 15th the frisking cars का and streamlining the traffic and all that and all of that checking for IEDs and all it used to be a big hassle ऐसा कुछ नहीं था इस बार no snipers, nothing like that. And we didn't have a blackout in the evenings. We had to pull these dark curtains so that light bahar nahi jani chahiye. We used to sit under candle because there was a diktat by the terror groups and the Hurriyat that it has to be celebrated as a black day. Nothing like that. Nothing like it was. And to see crowds and crowds of Kashmiri Muslims and Kashmiri Sikhs and Kashmiri Pandits, some of the families who stayed here, standing in lines and queuing up to see the parade and all. I mean, not just the stadium, but on the roads, and you have all of these tirangas fluttering. But beneath all of that, Kashmir has always had this dark underbelly. So
Hmm.
that is still there. So we would be naive to think that everything is hunky and dory. Uh, you have put up, has India done a lot in Kashmir? It has succeeded to a large extent. First of all, the scrapping of Article 370. Like I said, I think in your last podcast also, we were kind of told that any political party who would think of doing this would be committing political suicide. So, right? So, we used to check with constitutional lawyers. Any of us coming and visiting Delhi would pick up constitutional lawyers. Can't we break this Kashmir imbroglio? It had come to a stalemate. Nobody was ready to give in an inch. So we were constantly told, no political party has this willpower. But the BJP did it. So, that's one of the optimistic things that I have that if the government really wills it, if it has the will to solve it, it can. And then done it in a very smart way. I mean, we should put it on record. Not a single civilian death since August 5, 2019.
Hmm.
We've had a lot of military gains, army gains in militants and terrorists, and they are at an all-time low. Recruitment is at an all-time low. Uh, and inversely, we've had a lot of recruitment in the Indian armed forces from the Kashmiris themselves. And Kashmiris doesn't only mean the Valley Kashmiris; it also means Kashmiris in Doda and Akhnur and Jammu and Gujars and Bakarwals and Jammu people as well from all castes and creeds. So this is the first time I think the recruitment for the Indian Army is very high in Kashmir. So legally, yes, although there is the Supreme Court petitions being heard, uh, that's democracy, right? You have had petitions filed against the scrapping, and the Supreme Court of India, the bench is hearing it. But they did it. They did it. It was something unthinkable. We had this condition in our minds that it's the sanctity of the Article 370. Although only scholars and students of international law, students of history would go into it and see that it had already become hollow. There was nothing left of it. It was just a shell of a article. Starting from Bakshi Ghulam Ahmad's time, Sadiq's changes and reforms and all happening. So in a way, it was just a hollow shell left. And the negative influence of it, all the laws of Indian Penal Code not applied. I mean, first of all, me being a Kashmiri daughter, if I had married a non-state subject, I would not be entitled to my inheritance there. That was the first injustice of it. Then we heard about the West Pakistan refugees, not getting citizenship actually. Valmiki community, even despite being qualified graduates, postgraduates, even PhD, they could still only apply as Safai Karmacharis. That was there. So a lot of this discriminatory thing due to Article 370, this was done away with. And now after 4 years, that narrative on the ground is changing. That street talk, that living room talk, कि, अच्छा ये भी होता था, ये भी होता था, that state subject thing, probably not a good idea. How does it matter if other people from India come and buy land, it's a good thing because we are able to buy land, anywhere in India. So that thing has changed. That sanctimony, that sanctity of the Article 370, untouchable, which even today's Kashmiri politicians, they still have that rhetoric. Article 370 को वापस
Hmm.
लाना है,
Hmm.
उसको टच नहीं करना है. That thing is gone now. I mean, it's going away. It will take a few more years for it to solidify, but that narrative is changing. So that was a big win, basically. Militarily, of course, Adi, you're the expert.
नहीं नहीं नहीं, not
Counter
at all. I am not at all
counterterrorism
a military
operations,
expert.
they're cleaner. They're cleaner. Like
हाँ.
it used to be a lot of hassle, searching for IEDs and all, and this stopping of traffic. And you know how it is when you give a lot of power to the armed forces or the security personnel, or even the police for that matter, they become a little high-handed. So, that has been curbed. That has
मेरे
been
को,
curbed through.
one thing आपने ये बोला, and that's something which I wanted to actually bring up during the course of the show, क्योंकि मिलिट्री जो ऑपरेशंस होते हैं ना, इन दीज काइंड ऑफ एरियाज, यू कैन नॉट हैव मिलिट्री ऑपरेशंस विदाउट जो लोकल सपोर्ट होती है आपको. पहले जब मिलिट्री ऑपरेशंस होते थे, लोग घंटियां बजा बजा के, सीटियां बजा बजा के इधर उधर इंफॉर्मेशन भेजते थे. दे वुड जस्ट टेल द एंटायर रीजन. जो आज मणिपुर में हमारे साथ हो रहा है, जब वहां पर एक कॉर्डन ऑपरेशन होता है, तो ये लेडीज, पता है आपको, वो जो थाली होती है ना, सो व्हाट दीज लेडीज डू इज, ये हिल्स में बाहर रहते हैं, दे इनकी हट्स होती हैं, वहां पर रहती हैं ये. एंड जब ये वो कॉर्नर पूरे जितनी एंट्री स्पॉट्स होते हैं ना वो वैली के अंदर, सो दे वैली या विल हिल के अंदर, तो दे स्टे देयर. एंड जैसे ही ये कुछ आर्मी के या मिलिट्री का या पुलिस का कुछ ऑपरेशन आ रहा है, ये अपनी थाली बजानी शुरू हो जाती है चम्मच के साथ. फोक स्पून समथिंग, दे विल स्टार्ट बैंगिंग ऑन द थाली. सो द एंटायर विलेज गेट्स alerted. And then they would come across and all the women will come and stop the forces, and that entire drama which we are seeing today publicized, of course not the nasty one, but the women shouting, and this is a very normal thing in the northeast. ये चीज कश्मीर में भी होती थी एक टाइम पे.
We've had this in the
हाँ.
90s, we were told, like, when these crackdowns started, it was a new experience for us, that all the men of the family had to leave the homes and the fields and go to an open area where kind of a identification parade used to be there, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
of course, horrendous conditions since it was mostly minus temperatures. They were not even allowed to take any heating pot. हमारा कांगड़ी होता है. That, and then, as I said, some security personnel high-handed, often beating up youngsters or just for the heck of it. That those ego clashes used to be there, and the women used to put all their valuables in the pockets, and हम भी निकलते थे, in our courtyards or all ready for जब तक frisking हो रही होती थी. So it took a lot of time, I think, for the administration, first of all, politically, to get together and then listen to the people, that this high-handedness of uh, security ऐसे नहीं चलेगा, because उसमें casualties भी हो जाती थी. Like in 2010, when this again new wave of intifada started, you had these pellet gun cases, which
Hmm.
was completely, it took a lot of, I think, convincing and back and forth and negotiations on ki kindly riot control ke liye you will have to train your forces. So even we used to have this, once internet came and WhatsApp started, we used to have this mobilization on WhatsApp groups. Okay, the people who would come if area was being cordoned off for search and search operations. Women, of course, used as shields, young girls, children, and hats off to the Indian Army. They've never ever, done this kind of thing where they can shoot at human shields. So that used to complicate matters. But
बहुत
it's
ज्यादा.
taken a while. That's the
Hmm.
reason it's taken 3 decades, for the security personnel to get trained. Since, as you said, it's a civilian area. You're having a guerrilla war in a civilian area. I can understand the, the difficulty of the forces to operate there. And what you said about this help to the Indian Army can't happen without local help. Uh,
That
it's
is
actually a
critical.
war between families, inside families. You had overground workers for the terror groups, also belonging to the same family. And you have informers, as you say, helpers, people who used to warn the army that, there was a terror group or a militant group operating or a cell operating or some ID seen somewhere. So it's basically brothers versus brothers, cousins versus cousins, fathers against sons. And it's taken a long while for the forces, especially the elite force that J&K police is now in counterterrorism. It's taken a long time for them to get trained to it. This calling out during encounters, getting the parents to the encounter site and using loudspeakers, telling them to surrender. So it took a while to do this, to practice this to get to this point. So I think it's because of the modernizing techniques of fighting counterterrorism as India started collaborating with other countries who were fighting terrorism. So if you talk to the police officers also, they talk about these workshops happening and sensitizing of uh, operations and all that. So all of this was happening. All of this. So a lot of ground covered there, actually.
This is very interesting, brother versus brother, because
Hmm.
that tells you कि this is not a battle on the ground.
Hmm. Mine.
This is a battle of the minds. The problem with the battle of the minds is no bullet can kill the mind. You can kill the person who inside whom the mind is there, but होता क्या है, when you kill a person with that mind, there are four other minds that are born. Now, last time when we were discussing, we discussed these models. हमने Israeli model discuss किया, हमने Russian model discuss किया, Chinese तो पता नहीं क्या model है, we don't know exactly, but whatever we know about it. And then
National narrative ka model, not the
national
military
narrative.
model. Israeli
Yeah,
military model cannot work in Kashmir.
yeah.
But the
Now,
narrative, the national narrative, Russian
हाँ,
national narrative jo hai, like I
hmm.
said, Uzbeki still used to feel himself as a Russian first, then an Uzbeki, jab tak wo ikathe the. So, that Soviet thing. So, national narrative ka, yes, not the military one. Military is completely
So
different.
हमारा जो problem है, where our problem started was about 30 years ago. ठीक है? And the Israeli problem has been there for now 75 years, 75, 80 years. The Russians dealt with this problem for almost 400 years.
Hmm.
You know, they kept on dealing with this, and it kept on rearing its head again and again and again and again and again. The last one was the Chechens, which Putin is very
Hmm.
famous for taming, if I may say that. But our problem is relatively younger,
Hmm.
and when you look at that in comparison to something which is called the cycle of terrorism, टेररिज्म का एक साइकिल होता है, वो हर 30-40 साल में अपने आप को रिन्यू करता है, because previously if you saw terrorism जो 50, 60, 70s में था, it was one lone guy shooting some guy running away, and pinpricks.
More like gangs,
हाँ,
started with, I think, the Bader Menhoff gang, right? Kind of like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. Then it went on to the
Hamas is a gang again. Al
Hamas,
Qaeda is
and
a gang, right?
yeah,
हाँ,
the Black Panthers came out, and काफी
हाँ,
सारे gang type activity हुई.
हाँ.
जो हमने कश्मीर में देखा was basically a derivative of that. ये लोग वहां से सीखते थे और यहाँ पर आके ये लोग ट्राई करते थे, and we well known. A lot of it was learned from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. A lot of it was learned from anti-Israeli operations. कि क्या क्या ट्राई कर सकते हैं हम लोग इस जगहों पे.
It would be the
Now this,
later armed insurgency that you're talking about,
हाँ,
right?
now
But the idea
absolutely.
of an independent Kashmir is linked to the unfinished business of partition. So
That's fine.
that has its
I'm talking about,
roots.
हाँ, वो तो
that
रूट है. I'm talking about
हाँ,
जो
वो
fruit निकला ना
partition से भी
उसका.
पहले का रूट है, हाँ,
हाँ. So that
right?
fruit that came out
Huh. The
was a
armed insurgency
combination.
copied
Hmm.
from the Algerian revolution and the Palestinian
हाँ.
issue, and
Hmm.
they appropriated all of that. But
Hmm.
this idea that Kashmir does not belong to India, this civilizational disconnect जो करने की कोशिश हो रही थी,
जी.
वो goes back to Maududi, it goes back to Shah Waliullah, it goes back to the two nation theory, it goes back
Hmm.
to all of that, centuries
Absolutely.
old, one at least
Absolutely.
1 century old, right? 1857 वहीं से सारा गड़बड़ start हो गया. This Mughal rule that is gone, this Islamic supremacy, what we call Muslim exceptionalism, so that has its roots there. So, militarily, as you said, you may try to contain the radicalism, but you cannot kill a mind with a bullet. A mind that has this idea of separatism, exceptionalism, basically the two nation theory.
So they brought this fruit here. now our response has also been a learning. If you look at it, पहले तो hard होता था एकदम धम 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 धम, lot of sometimes excesses were also
knee jerk
happened.
reactions, knee
हाँ,
jerk
so उसमें
reactions.
excesses भी होते हैं काफी सारे.
Hey,
uh,
Daukal massacre was there,
हाँ
Sopor
जी.
was there,
So
right?
होते हैं, that is
Idda firing.
part of the process, if I may. अब देखिए, each loss of life, no matter
Hmm.
who it is tragic. But this is a part of the learning curve, that you learn how to deal with this problem. The question that I'm actually coming to is, do you think today we as a country, हमारा जो एक national approach है इस problem के against में, have we learned how to deal with it? And I am not hinting कि problem खत्म हो गया है. मैं पूछ रहा हूँ कि हमको अभी प्रॉब्लम समझ में आया है, एंड हैव वी गॉट अ वे हाउ टू डील विद इट गोइंग फॉरवर्ड.
Well, it all started when the internet came. See, 1990s, we were completely cut off. All these things were happening in front of our homes, in our neighborhoods, crossfires and all of this. We weren't even understanding what was happening. And we tried to get word out. Getting word out ka matlab hai, looking at relatives who live outside and looking at our neighbors fleeing, the ethnic cleansing. And suddenly this one Pandit lady is killed in my neighborhood. And what do you do? Who do you tell? And what do you want to? You can't make connections. You don't understand what is happening. But once the internet made an advent, the technology came in, we started making these connections, and it's then that we realized what was happening. It has a history. It's actually groups working here on the ground. These are families, as I said, relation में भी हो सकते हैं, who work for the ISI, who are getting funded by the ISI. The media, Kashmiri media, was completely pro-Pakistan. It wouldn't even allow any report of terrorist activity, terrorist atrocities to be printed. So इसके दौरान इसके बीच में, to make up our minds, you had to rely on your own moral compass कि what is happening is wrong. The pandits being targeted, not just pandits, secular Muslims, uh, they were being targeted. They were fleeing. They were hit lists and all that. So it took a while for even us to learn exactly what was happening. And then to make these connections to Pakistan and then realize that it's basically a fallout of 1979, the most crucial year for the Islamic world. It's the Afghan Soviet jihad ka fallout, that it's the siege of Makkah, that it's the Iranian revolution, the Wahhabism which is spilling in, and suddenly, because suddenly realizing the preacher in your mosque is a completely different person. He's not a Kashmiri, he is from a Deoband school, and he's preaching all these radical interpretations, जो कि हमने कभी सुनी नहीं थी. And then realizing कि अच्छा, this is an export of Wahhabism from the Middle East. So that took a while. That really took a while. And then to see our own generation, I mean, it's been hard for Kashmiri women to suddenly see our sons, our brothers, our fathers getting radicalized, where we had liberal parents and suddenly saying कि नहीं, you need to wear the hijab, you cannot play sports, no music allowed, start praying 5 times a day. तो ये हमारे घरों में हो रहा था. I have grown up with male cousins, and suddenly the male cousins becoming so radicalized. I mean, it was a siege of the mind from within, and then the military and all these crackdowns and these crossfires, it was a siege from outside as well. And जहाँ पे मिलिट्री का वो कम होता था, फिर हुर्रियत का स्टार्ट हो जाता था, द हड़ताल कैलेंडर, इकोनॉमी completely gone. It affected a lot of families because there were daily wages as well. So it's been a while. I mean, it took 30 years to understand, and I feel India, for us, it was like when once the internet came up and we started making connections to mainland India. We started making friends across. We were disappointed to see Indians didn't know anything about Kashmir.
Hmm.
Abhi tak they get confused between Jammu and Srinagar, and we have to tell them there's a whole Pir Panjal range in between. It's actually 900 kilometers ka difference hai. Even the New York Times gets the map wrong or gets the location wrong. Something happening in Jammu, some good news, and they say Kashmir mein ye hua hai. And some bad news happening somewhere, and then again it's JNK mein ho raha hai, and we say no, it's not JNK. This is Ladakh. So that was disappointing for us. That mainland Indians did not know a lot about Kashmir, its history. Not many people had heard of the Raj Tarangni. That our
Hmm.
history goes back to the Mahabharata war. We have the civilizational connection. There is a Sharda Peeth, which happens to be in Neelam Valley in POK. That's our main thing, it's one of the main dhams.
Yep.
So ये फिर बताना mainland Indians को, and then all we used to get was a jingoistic, nationalistic कि कश्मीर हमारा है, ठीक है हमारा है, लेकिन वहां पे कश्मीरी जो रहते हैं उनको समझने की कोशिश कीजिए. वी हैव हैड शेविज्म काइंड ऑफ थिंग देयर. वी हैव हैड दिस मिक्सचर ऑफ ऋषिज्म, दिस सूफीज्म. तो हमारा ये है. So I don't like to call it Kashmiriyat because when we started making actual connections with the pundits, they had left in the 90s. We
Yeah,
grew up and
yeah.
we started making connections on social media, and they said ki, what happened with them when they left. So we were like, ki, now we understood what was happening, and it was disappointing to just hear this aggressive jingoistic nationalism ki Kashmir hamara hai, but then not realizing ki who the Kashmiris are, what are they all about, and who our heroes are. I mean, nobody had heard कि 1947 में, Maqbool Sherwani, he had saved Kashmir. Practically one person. We had not heard about Brigadier Rajendra Singh. I had to discover that, as a Kashmiri. So ये हो रहा था. I think
I
to a
mean,
large extent, internet has been responsible for this.
legends. These people are Brigadier Rajendra Singh के ऊपर तो I've done a
Yes.
whole show.
I mean, even Somnath Sharma. I mean, I heard it in my 30s. I suddenly came across this and I said, oh, this person has saved Kashmir, and we had no idea. I mean, JNK, this light infantry, Jacolites, no? तो उनका बहुत बड़ा योगदान है, and ये हमें सिखाया नहीं जाता. वो तो हम लोग हैं, थोड़े हिस्ट्री बफ्स हैं, तो हम पढ़ लेते हैं. Now we are able to disseminate this information, but it's not mainstream yet.
Is it living room conversation right now in that region कि लोग अभी
Yes,
घरों में बैठ के यार क्या हुआ यार ये कुछ बेवकूफ तो नहीं बनाया
yes.
हमको? Is
Those
it living room
questions,
conversations today?
yes, those questions have started, yes. Especially the visuals coming across from Pakistan. Not just Pakistan, POK as well. Like we
Like,
talk to people there now, and they're like, really, you have central universities, you have your own universities, you have your own hospitals, your roads, and all this. And we are like, you still don't have a central university, you still don't have a proper working hospital. And they told us that we are supposed to give kind of an affidavit, when you're applying for a passport, that you will not. It's an official thing that you have to say you will not ask for azadi from Pakistan. I say, and we were like, कि हमारे आजादी वालों ने तो करियर बना लिए यहाँ पे. We have this much of democracy and freedom, and they said, नहीं, we will be taken, we'll be disappeared overnight if we say anything like that. Kashmir has an independent nature,
बचे
and we
कितने हैं
were
वहां
like,
पर? How many people are actually
हाँ,
left in that
Kashmiri
region?
speaking ज़्यादा नहीं है. हाँ, it's the demography has changed completely. So this is the argument we put to people who say UN resolutions, UN resolutions. We say, okay, fine, but where are the Kashmiris in POK? And UN resolutions में तो फिर referendum पूरे इसका करवाना है. And first of all, first and foremost, Pakistan army has to leave, completely vacate all the territories. Thirdly, it's not mandatory on India. If they want, they can have it under their supervision of security. So ये था कि people had not read the UN resolutions. Like I said, the sanctity of the Article 370, it had
You know,
been, conditioned in our minds. You can't touch it.
ये जो UN resolution is also another fake. Why? Because
Yes.
सिमला एग्रीमेंट के बाद आपके जितने भी एग्रीमेंट्स थे उससे पहले दे ऑल बिकेम नल एंड वॉइड बिकॉज द रिलेशनशिप जो स्टार्ट हुई थी एंड जो बायलैटरल एग्रीमेंट हुआ था बिटवीन इंडिया एंड पाकिस्तान व्हाट वाज सेड वाज जो भी हुआ हुआ 72 के बाद बात करते हैं दैट इज व्हाट बोथ द कंट्रीज हैड अग्रीड टू एंड दिस वाज अंडर द वॉच ऑफ द यूएन एज वेल दिस वाज टेकन अप इन द यूएनएससी वेयर पीपल रैटिफाइड इट सो दैट होल नैरेटिव अबाउट ये जो रेफरेंडम का नैरेटिव है ये जो यूएन रेजोल्यूशन का ये तो है ही नहीं दिस इज नॉट इवन देयर इन द पिक्चर एंड इट्स वेरी फनी दैट ये चीज बार बार आती है व्हेन यू यार ये तो खत्म हो गया भाई इसके बारे में क्या बात कर रहे हैं हम लोग
Now we also question this occupation thing, that India is occupying, and we are like, what is it occupying? How is it occupying? You tell me. Don't you own your land where you have
Yeah.
your house? You are not able to give it to any outsider. अगर कोई आता भी उसको आपको लीज पे देते हैं, उसको अलाउड नहीं है बाय करना, unless and until now अब डोमिसाइल का हो रहा है. Secondly, this jihad thing. हमारी जो अंडरस्टैंडिंग इस्लाम की थी, जो हमें बड़े बुजुर्गों ने बताया था कि इफ योर रिलीजन इज बीइंग थ्रेटेड देन यू आर अलाउड टू डू जहाद, द आर्म जहाद. Otherwise, it's always about the higher jihad, taking care of your parents, getting your sister married, taking care of orphans. That is the higher jihad that we were taught. The lower jihad only comes when you're threatened, your religion is threatened. And we were like, so many mosques, you are able to practice. You do your Ramzan, there is Eid, and there is so much. What is the need for a jihad? Like, it wasn't like the Indian government was stopping you from offering prayers or not practicing your religion. So this is what is being contested now, as you say, in academic classrooms and streets and living room conversations. And now today, the Muslim middle-aged people, the Muslim children are not afraid to speak out and say, "Ki, okay, fine, you tell us that India is this and India is that, and the Hindus are this and the Hindus are that, but then what happened to the Kashmiri Pandits? We have not grown up seeing even one single Kashmiri Pandit. जबकि हमारे बड़े बुजुर्ग कहते हैं we used to live together. So where are they? What happened to them? Is this house that we are living in? Does this belong to a Kashmiri Pandit? Is this a distress sale? So these questions are coming up, and it's making the older generation very uncomfortable because parents have to, grandparents have to give answers. Why was this thing about Pakistan ingrained in the minds? We lost two generations. Two generations are buried in our graveyards, and the youth now are taking a reckoning from the older generation. Ki, how did you even condition us into this?
And that's a very आपने I kind of went into a thought process, to think कि आपकी फैमिली में कोई ऐसी बात हो रही हो कि भाई दादाजी ये बताओ ये जो घर है ये हमारा है
ये
कि किसी और का है.
हाँ, क्योंकि
And
मेरे
that's the
रिलेटिव्स डिस्ट्रेस सेल्स हुई, एंड सिंस आई एम आउटस्पोकन एंड ऑल, इसी तरह और भी लोग थे, एंड दे डू. So it also ties up then to going to history and saying, oh, right, Islam is not actually native to India. We were all Hindus. And conversion कहीं ना कहीं तो हुआ ही होगा, परदादा वगैरह कभी. And हम जो सुन रहे हैं हिंदू से, वो कह रहे हैं कि conquest was bloody, invasion was bloody. And now we are hearing it must have been the largest mass scale, bloodiest invasions that we ever had. तो ये हो रहा है. The Hindus are forcing, the right wing rhetoric in television and mainstream media is forcing them to question this. तो वो आ
नहीं,
रहा है.
that is, see, I think, and I always say this, uh, although जो भी ये differences होते हैं, जो communal differences होते हैं, ये होते हैं, they are very sad. There's no question about it. But मैं एक और चीज से देखता हूँ, if you look at any country, there's a point or time in that country where things become heated, because the only way that they can actually come to a point कि भाई they both the parties realize भाई ये करेंगे तो हम दोनों मरेंगे. Just okay, we've come to this point, let's now bring it back down. And I'll give you an example. You look at what happened with the Irish in the 60s and 70s in UK. You look at the black riots in the Americas, 69, 74, terrible bloody things. You look at the Russians, they went through the same thing during the 90s and this and that. Every country, हर देश में ऐसा हुआ है कि उनको एक ऐसे पॉइंट पे आके खड़े जहां पर सोसाइटी वाज प्रॉब्ली जस्ट इन अ स्ट्रिंग और वो टूटने वाला था. बट देन द सोसाइटी रियलाइज यार ये टूटा तो हम सारे गए. Nobody is benefiting from this. So everybody kind of just gives space to each other, and this I call this societal correction.
प्रॉब्लम ये है, इंडिया में ये रिपीटेड होता है. यू मेंशन इन अदर कंट्रीज उनका एक आध बार हुआ है, ज्यादा ज्यादा दो बार होगा हिस्ट्री में. इफ यू टेक 70-60 डेकेड्स, इंडिया में ये रिपीटेड होता है. व्हाई? बिकॉज द इंडियन मुस्लिम कम्युनिटी में ये अनकंफर्टेबल ट्रुथ्स मेन स्ट्रीम नहीं है. If they had not been appeased for all these 7 decades, they would have made a reconciliation with their hard truths, that yes, we are into supremacy, that yes, we have had our hand in what you call today the right wing calls Hindu subjugation and all that. That yes, we've had a bloody conquest. There is not everything about the Mughal rule is all glory and all of that. It is bloody also. They would have had these reconciliations. Now since right wing is doing a lot of these research and it's putting a lot of these incidents across, as Muslims, we have had to face these questions. Ki, what about the Mopla massacre? What about this massacre and that massacre? Right? What about the Bengalis? What about this? तो अगर ये 60-70s में ये मेन स्ट्रीम होता, अभी तक reconciliation हुआ होता, वो सोसाइटल करेक्शन हो गई होती. क्योंकि सेक्युलरिज्म कैन नॉट बी अ वन वे स्ट्रीट. Same as communalism is not a prerogative of one community only. Communalism
Yeah.
दोनों तरफ है. लेकिन आपने जब इस पर्टिकुलर कम्युनिटी को, जो सबसे लार्जेस्ट माइनॉरिटी है, आपने उसको कभी वो चांस ही नहीं दिया कि वो अपने हार्ड अनकंफर्टेबल फैक्ट्स एंड ट्रूथ्स के साथ एक रिकंसिलेशन करे, तो आपका ये बार बार ये जो आता है ना, दिस फ्लेयर अप, it happens repeatedly. It happened in the
I,
60s, it happened in the 70s, it happened in the 80s, it happened in the 90s, Kashmir, since, and now it's also happening again. It happened in post 1992, Babri. Now it's also happening. You had no. तो ये होगा. Why? Because I believe, since I belong to one particular community, कि उनको वो reconciliation with the hard truths नहीं हुआ. वो हुआ ही नहीं.
आप एक you said something very interesting, and I'm going to थोड़ा सा probe you if you don't mind.
Yeah.
आपने एक चीज बोली कि ये कुछ हुआ नहीं because people are not let to discuss or they were not given the information. ठीक है, तो this is something that let's both agree to this. I say that and correct me if I'm wrong, it's just a fleeting thought that came to me, and I'm saying कि okay, they were not led to, they were not given all this stuff to understand कि यार reality ये है, देखो, पढ़ो, समझो, बात करो. This was missing, and it's even missing today in a very large part of the country.
For example, in
Hmm.
school, we just had this chapter on Mughals, right? Had there been a chapter which spoke the truth about Aurangzeb, it would have prompted discussions in the school, which
Yeah.
would not have been communal, which would have been
Hmm.
supervised under the trained teachers, and the families would have grown up knowing कि अच्छा ठीक है, there was a despot हमारी तरफ से भी, लेकिन then we've had an Akbar as well, we've had Kashmir में तो Zainul Abidin as well, right? And then we would have gone back to our roots and said, yes, at one point we were Hindus, and we have had a glorious civilization which gave us the Hindu numerical system, जिसकी वजह से आज सारा साइंस चलता है, राइट? इस्लामिक वर्ल्ड में भी जब उनका इस्लामिक साइंस बना, बिकॉज ऑफ द हिंदू अरबिक न्यूमरल सिस्टम, it gave us zero. It's given us these fabulous engineering marvels जिसका आज तक हमें नहीं पता चल रहा है, those ancient temples and everything. It was an engineering feat. We would have been proud of those roots as well. So you would not have had this disconnect, this attempt to Arabize yourself. We would have strongly grounded Muslims if this would have been part of mainstream academia, mainstream media. You know, uh, for example, if you pick up these 80s talk shows, जो start हो गए थे 90s में, ये जब channel start हुई, these talk shows happened. You see this protection of the Muslim panel कि
Hmm.
वहां नहीं जाना
That's
है,
what I'm
उस
coming. That's what I'm
टैबू
coming.
टॉपिक पे
Hmm.
नहीं जाना है. The
Hmm.
Hindus were all out with their caste system, their laws, their all of that. Whatever was wrong in Hinduism, that would be discussed openly. But when it came to the Muslims, there was this mollycoddling happening कि नहीं नहीं ठीक है everything.
इनको छोड़
You
दो
know
अभी.
who सबसे बड़ा disadvantage फिर किसको हुआ? Muslim women, Indian Muslim women, and today they are leading the fight for their empowerment. So they
I,
were
I
at a
I'll ask
huge
you that question
disadvantage.
right at the end because मेरा एक कहना है इसके बारे में and about the Muslim women, and a lot of people may not like it, but I'll ask you this at the end because अभी थोड़ा सा we have to cover a little ground to understand this problem a little further. I think they're a very interesting conversation, guys. Keep your questions coming in. I can see a lot of comments, questions. Please keep your comments, thoughts. We are having a conversation, and this is a conversation which is going places here and there. But at the end of it, if you see एक picture बन रही है, which we will be able to come up to by the end of it, and I'm trying to take it to that picture, and till now I've been successful. So let's see how we go forward. So I was coming to that point कि इनको बताया नहीं, they've not been told, okay, this is what your history was. I sometimes kind of realize, and it's probably a known truth today, that this was done purposefully, right? To keep that barrier, to keep that this thing कि भाई अगर ये मिल गए तो यार गेम ही खत्म हो जाएगा. Today, what is stopping it? Because at the end of it, there is information, right? There is people like you talking, writing. So many people are talking about it, and there's a whole lot of research which is there online, which talks about the reality of situations. Leave alone Kashmir for a little bit for this answer. I'm talking about the whole of our country. Do you see these questions being asked in living rooms today?
They are. They are. The problem is that the same left liberals, let's call it Nehruvian Marxist, वो जो historians थे, historians कहते हैं उनको आज, uh, I call it the soft bigotry of low expectations. उनको मुस्लिम कम्युनिटी से एक्सपेक्टेशन ही नहीं है कि ये सुधरेंगे, रिफॉर्म होंगे, एडवांस होंगे, कि उनमें एक टॉलरेंस लेवल आएगी फॉर अनकंफर्टेबल ट्रूथ्स, कि ये बिगटरी बन गया है. They whitewashed the textbooks. They don't allow discussions on media. They haven't allowed any kind of movies to be made which would have prompted discussions. And now the Indian Muslim community is being forced to face these uncomfortable truths. और ये right wing कर रहा है, Hindu right wing. It should have come from the Muslim intellectuals themselves. Had a very truthful documentary been made about Aurangzeb, had a very objective movie being made about Mughals, had very a lot of this realistic literature being allowed to publish, where the flaws in our community, where Muslim women have this secondary citizenship, Sharia laws are misogynistic, where all of these discussions would have been, where this othering of Hindus, this othering of non-Muslims, this Islamic supremacy would have been discussed. So today, the Indian Muslim community would have really, really, वो कहते हैं ना, would have been in the 21st century. They are still a century पीछे, क्योंकि you never allowed this kind of debate, this kind of culture, this critical thinking culture to develop. Because of your bigotry, soft bigotry of low expectations. आपको expectation ही नहीं है कि हम में इंडियन मुस्लिम कम्युनिटी में ये कुवत हो सकती है, to face our truths. हमारे हीरोज हैं, वी हैव इंटेलेक्चुअल हीरोज रह चुके हैं. माय होल वर्क इज अबाउट दैट, स्टार्टिंग फ्रॉम इब्न रुश्द, 12th century, we had Islamic science, and coming down throughout the tradition, I'm tracing that. Since I call myself a heresiographer, I'm tracing that heresy right down to modern Muhammad Arkun and Turkish writers and Moroccan writers, and all of these French intellectuals, French Muslim intellectuals, and India maybe coming up. You see a lot of them on my timeline. I keep sharing their articles and everything. So ऐसा नहीं है कि हम नहीं एडवांस हो सकते थे to the level of the Hindus जिस level पे हैं. They critically think about their religion. But these left liberals, they did the soft bigotry of low expectations. And इसमें हमारा ही disadvantage रहा.
That's an interesting thing, and these are left liberals who are mostly atheists or communists who don't believe in anything.
Wonderful work coming up, new scholarship coming up, the Red Green Alliance, they call it. This alliance of the left and the Islamists. दोनों को ही अथॉरिटी अच्छी नहीं लगती, दोनों ही अपने नेचर में टोटलिटेरियन है, लेकिन वो जो अलायंस बना रखा है, क्योंकि एनार्की करनी है, वो जो एक स्टेट बन चुका है उसको टॉपल करना ही करना है, राइट? सो lot of Asra Nomani's book is out recently, the Red Green Alliance, and I recommend that for your viewers as well. And it's a open thing now on the internet. Anybody can pick up any YouTube channel and it'll talk about this Islamist leftist alliance.
Sorry, I was just noting down that book so that I could get it for
Asra
myself.
Nomani's, Woke Army. The title is Woke Army, the Red
Army.
Green Alliance.
I heard it, it just slipped out of my mind. After that, आपने refer करा तो मैं बोला यार लिख लेते हैं before you forget again. मैं आपसे अभी now let's get back to Kashmir. Now Kashmir today, Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh तो अभी separate हो गया, which was a big thorn actually in the entire region, for the entire region. Because
they didn't like it. Ladakhis didn't like being tied to us, because they had a lot of stepmotherly treatment happening.
Yeah.
So I'm glad they are.
Even the Kashmiris, JNK guys also didn't like it because बोलते थे यार वहाँ पर क्यों भेजे हैं ये वो and all that. वहाँ पर.
I always see it from the point of view of the natives. They didn't like it. The Buddhists there, the Ladakhis didn't like it. They would constantly, जो भी हमारी JNK state assembly होती थी, उसमें constant complaints होती थी, हमारी तरफ फंड नहीं आ रहा है, हमारा डेवलपमेंट नहीं हो रहा है. They have this hill council thing उसी वजह से कि हमारी तरफ भी कुछ attention हो. बट वही होता है फिर, जो कुछ elite politicians अपना अपना वो चलाते थे श्रीनगर में आके, लेकिन एरिया डेवलप नहीं हो रहा था. And being a military frontier, you had to develop it. right? It was only during the Modi government I saw that Daulat Beg airport being modified
No, no.
eventually.
Yeah, I
वो
mean
इतने
upgraded,
सालों से नहीं किया था. So
upgraded. Yeah,
I'm
it
glad they're
was
free.
occasion.
They're free. They can develop, and lots of funds going there now.
So
They have their
that's
own.
that gives an opportunity for that region. जो JNK का region है, उसमें भी दो parts हैं, एक जम्मू region है, एक कश्मीर region है. That gives an opportunity for that region to look for its own self. देखिए ये बड़ा important होता है. You have to leave a region to kind of space itself.
Yes.
राइट जो आज आप देख रहे हैं वहां पर लॉट ऑफ पीपल गेट पिस्ड ऑफ कि यार उसमें वहां पर चीजें क्यों नहीं आगे चल रही ये क्यों नहीं हो रहा वो क्यों नहीं हो रहा दिस इज नॉट हैपनिंग दैट इज नॉट एंड आई आई एग्री विद अ लॉट ऑफ पीपल हु से कि क्रिटिसिज्म है कि भाई आपने 370 को हो गया 5 साल हो गए 4 साल व्हाटएवर इट इज अभी तक कुछ हुआ क्यों नहीं उसके बारे में सो मैं एक चीज बोलता हूँ यार आप लोग जो बोलते हो डिले हो रहा है अगेंस्ट व्हाट वेयर इज द मॉडल इन द वर्ल्ड कि कहीं पर आपने ऐसा कुछ करा और आप कॉपी कर रहे हो और आप बोल रहे हो डिले हो रहा है because I look at it in a simple way that region needs to curate itself. जब तक वो अपने आप को क्यूरेट नहीं करेगा आप जितने मर्जी ये इलेक्शन जितना मर्जी करा लो कोई फायदा नहीं है एंड व्हाट इफ वी आर सीइंग टुडे जो आपने भी काफी हद तक इसके ऊपर हिंट कर रहा है कि अ फायर ऑफ क्यूरेशन हैज स्टार्टेड वुड यू एग्री टू दैट
It has, and ऐसा नहीं है कि things are not happening there. A lot of development happening. The media reports are not all deceptive. Uh, People on the ground believe we don't need elections yet. This is something on the ground. I mean, we don't want
एग्जैक्टली
statehood yet because they are constantly in the fear that the Gupkar gang is going to come back.
कम बैक
Because if you see the rhetoric right now, politicians speaking the same old thing that they used to, it's just a power grab. They are not even allowing space for fresh, young politicians to come in the front, right? So we are constantly in that fear. We don't want the Gupkar alliance to come back. LG is doing a fantastic job. Fantastic job. Zero tolerance for corruption. Corruption हमेशा रहेगा. It's never going to be a completely 100% corruption free
दैट्स हाउ इट
society.
इज
लेकिन बहुत हद तक
इवन
कम हो
या
गया है, right? A lot of tourism is back. This was our backbone. Our economy had totally gone bonkers during the Hurriyat's Hartal calendar and everything. We had dole outs coming from the central government, लेकिन वो accountability कहीं नहीं थी. And we saw this in the September floods also, 2014 floods. A lot of this aid package came. Not all Kashmiris got it. So you can understand कि बीच में वो कहाँ चला गया. And there is still no accountability for all that package money. So LG doing a fantastic job. He has reached out to the minorities within Kashmir as well. The Shias. We had this brilliant Muharram, first time procession allowed. Again, it was not stopped because of any other bias or anything. It was for the security reason. But since security is really good in the city now, they were allowed to have the procession on the main roads. Processions used to happen by lanes में होते थे, restricted होते थे, timings इधर उधर होती थी. That was it. They have reached out to the Ahmadis. Ahmadis feel very secure in Kashmir, and there is a population of Ahmadis. They have their mosques and everything. ऐसा नहीं है, and this is not much of a highlighted fact Indian mainstream में that Ahmadi community is perfectly safe in Kashmir. उनके खिलाफ कोई फतवा नहीं
पाकिस्तानी वुड
होता.
बी हैप्पी
Nobody destroys their mosque and everything. Fully functioning. I have relatives married to Ahmadis. ऐसा कुछ भी नहीं है वहां पे. Shias feeling perfectly fine. The Kashmiri Pandits, yes, a lot of them trying to trickle back, but then what they demand from the government is different. But you can see a lot of Kashmiri Pandits coming for the Kheer Bhavani festival, the Shivratri and everything, coming to the temples. The temples are being reconstructed, managed, and everything. Of course, the complaints will always be there because itna bada wo hua hai, social fabric has been drawn. It will always be there, right? And secondly, the work ethics. That was the main thing. In 30 years में work ethics हमारे completely doldrums में थे. People didn't want to work क्योंकि पैसा आ रहा था, काम हो नहीं रहा था. So this what the LG's administration has done is you have to come to office. Fingerprint scanner, whatever जो भी तरह से attendance होगी, you cannot then leave Friday के दिन mosque के लिए and then वहीं से गायब. You have to come back for work and 4 बजे 5 बजे आपका sign out हो जाएगा. So work ethics being built, वो चाहे private हो, public हो, government हो, कुछ भी हो, एक work ethic वो जो culture है वो हो रहा है. Thirdly, youth जो हमारा इतना सारा rage what they saw on television all these years, stone pelting and everything, that is being channelized. Sports, amazing complexes coming up. You have tourism back. You have winter sports. In fact, development of these smart cities and all that is basically for those Winter Olympics. It looks like a European city today if you go to Gulmarg, with all these facilities and the cable car and everything. तो
Yeah,
ये
we
हो रहा है,
saw
वो
photographs for
channelize
the
हो रहा है,
G20. Hmm.
right? We have a youth ka problem, drug ka, since narco terrorism is still there. Lekin rehabilitation programs are there. Like all offices that deal with it, they understand ki the sensitization and rehabilitation of youth and everything. Uh, we lack only in two things. One is, again, as I said, work ethics के साथ साथ the population needs to be made to understand they need to pay the electricity bill. वो देना है, प्रॉपर्टी टैक्स देना है, वाटर टैक्स लगेगा जैसे हर किसी सिटीजन ऑफ इंडिया में लगता है इफ इट्स एन अर्बन सिटी, राइट? तो वो अभी आई थिंक द एलजी एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन इज फेसिंग अ लिटिल बिट ऑफ प्रॉब्लम्स विद दैट, क्योंकि वो स्मार्ट मीटर लगाने की कोशिश होती है डाउनटाउन में, द विमेन कम अगेन एंड देन दे डिसरप्ट द प्रोसेस, बट दे आर फाइटिंग बैक, द ब्यूरोक्रेट्स आर फाइटिंग बैक, द एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव ऑफिसर्स आर फाइटिंग बैक.
It'll
ठीक
take
है,
time. It'll take time.
it will
I
take
mean, it'll
time,
take time.
right?
Yeah.
Second
Hmm.
is this I wish the government could do a little bit about consumption limit. हमारा जो इंडियन बिग फैट वेडिंग है वो कश्मीर में भी प्रॉब्लम है. वो बहुत एक प्राइस का एक वो लिमिट हो जाता, कंजम्पशन का एक लिमिट होता, बिकॉज दिस इज समथिंग विच इज देयर इन पाकिस्तान. This is something that Pakistani friends have said कि you cannot have more than 6 dishes or 5 dishes served at a wedding. There's a limit, and they enforce it. लाहौर में, कराची में, इस्लामाबाद में,
उनके
and these
पास
are
तो है
Muslim
नहीं ना
weddings.
कुछ.
हाँ, मुस्लिम वेडिंग में एक वो थोड़ा कंजम्पशन का अगर लिमिट हो जाता, क्योंकि वेस्टेज नहीं होना चाहिए, एंड लॉट ऑफ टन्स ऑफ दैट फूड वेस्टेज, बट खैर दैट्स हैपनिंग. Secondly, micro financing for these entrepreneurship plans projects for women, कॉटेज इंडस्ट्री के लिए. हमारा हैंडीक्राफ्ट्स इज बैक, right? And because of the tourism and these women are getting empowered. सो इट्स नॉट लाइक थिंग्स आर नॉट हैपनिंग, थिंग्स आर हैपनिंग, अपने पेस पे हो रही हैं. स्टार्टअप्स इतने सारे हमारे खुल रहे हैं, हमारा रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट अच्छा हो रहा है. इन यू हैव दिस इस्लामिक यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी, यू हैव कश्मीर यूनिवर्सिटी, यू हैव जम्मू यूनिवर्सिटी एज वेल. उनका R&D हो रहा है. Studies are on time and research papers are being published. You have these IAS exams happening, civil services exams happening. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि कुछ हो नहीं रहा है, बट यू कांट, as you said, there's no model to match it to कि किस space पे होना चाहिए,
ये बड़ा
right?
फनी क्रिटिसिज्म है. I इलेक्शन क्यों नहीं हो रहे? अरे भाई, हो जाएंगे
नहीं,
यार.
we don't want, we don't want the elections. We need
What's
the
the
LG.
rush?
LG should stay for a few more years, and we
Yeah,
don't want statehood abhi unless and until the terrorism problem is zero, negligible, totally. तब
I'm
तक तो
between
statehood नहीं.
between you and me. I say 10 years, minimum 10 years. One
Yeah,
decade
but then
has
India has
to
to
go.
establish its democratic credentials as well. So
No, that is there. But you can talk about इंटरनेशनल नैरेटिव्स कि भाई आपके ऊपर कोई वॉशिंगटन पोस्ट में आर्टिकल लिखने दो भाई, तुम मेरे से भी पैसे ले लो, मेरी तरफ से भी लिखो फ्री में, कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. आई डोंट केयर, दिस इज माय कंट्री, आई विल डील विद इट द वे आई वांट टू. दूसरी चीज एक 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 विच इज वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग टू मी, जियोपॉलिटिकल एंगल इसका है, क्योंकि कश्मीर जो एक नैरेटिव बनाया था कि भाई ये इस्लामिक है, दिस इज एन इस्लामिक इशू, राइट? OIC, yap, 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 yap. Saudi Arabia would do yap. I mean, Dubai kept its nose clean to a large extent, but they were doing a lot of hidden activity. Qatar is, Al Jazeera is, I mean, kudos to their effort. Trust me, I really wonder. They put in so much effort into this, but in any case. So, yeah,
disinformation warfare, it's not conventional warfare. It was conventional to the 90s, proxy war. Like now it's disinformation warfare after 2000.
itna karne ke baad bhi they've failed. So, you know how it works, right? Narratives based on nonsense will always give you that only. So the result is this thing, which brings me to this thing. So एक Islamic वो बनाया था कि भाई all Islamic nations need to this thing. Even now Mahathir Mohamad was there, वो उसको तो बेचारे को उठा के फेंक दिया बाहर. But then you have Turkey, which is yap 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 all the time. Now when you put in that Islamic angle to it, right? And suddenly you see now the same Middle East that used to come and criticize is investing hundreds and billions of dollars there. So I asked this question one time, यार काहे का dispute अब? कैसा dispute? आई मीन एक
For
पाकिस्तानी के
us,
साथ मेरा
for
कुछ
us
आर्गुमेंट होगा
on the
था तो आई
ground, it
आस्क्ड हिम,
changed. I think it changed the day Saudi Arabia announced its first cinema and concert, music concert. Everything changed overnight because now आपके पास कोई जवाजियत ही नहीं थी to the terror groups, to the extremists, to the radical politicians and everybody की, because your first question was कश्मीर में सिनेमा हाउस क्यों नहीं है जब सऊदी अरेबिया
सऊदी
में
में
सिनेमा हाउसेस खुल रहे हैं. So,
क्या बोलोगे?
राइट. तो वो
एंड टू टॉप इट ऑल वो पैसे भी डाल रहा है उसी जगह में जहां पर वो बोलते हैं नहीं नहीं बहुत प्रॉब्लम है, मुस्लिम्स को बहुत तंग, वहीं पे आके हार्डकोर द सो कॉल्ड द किला होल्डर फॉर इस्लाम comes down and puts money there. So, I mean, I want to ask this whole narrative builders who say, nahi, nahi, Kashmir, ye, no, there's that, ye, wo, and all that. Bhai, kahe ka yaar? These are the same countries who are coming and putting money.
it's tied up to your perception being created about India, that that Muslim genocide happening in India. It's tied up to that. These are the
Ah,
connections we made once we came out to the NCR region. That this Kashmir thing, it's occupied by a Hindu army. इसको जिहाद कर रहे हैं हम उसके लिए. एंड वी स्टार्टेड रियलाइजिंग कि ये बड़ा नैरेटिव जो बना रखा है कि सब कॉन्टिनेंट में जो मुस्लिम्स के साथ हो रहा है, दैट परसेप्शन बीइंग क्रिएटेड, दैट नैरेटिव बीइंग क्रिएटेड, इट्स टाइड अप टू दैट. Because if you have to go back to the last 20 years of Kashmiri media and see what exactly were they trying to portray. Like I said, it was a lopsided media. They would only write about the high-handedness of the security forces. They would never write about the problems with Sharia laws which the women were facing there. They would never write about the problems under Article 370 where daughters could not inherit if they married outside. They would never ever write about the atrocities committed by terrorists. And if, since Adi, your channel is about dev talks, you must have discussed the reign of terror during Riaz Naiku,
hmm?
right? The reign of terror during Burhan Wani to kuch nahi tha. He never killed
Acha,
anybody. But ये जो वो
he
सारा
was a
media hype
stupid
था.
guy.
But
Yeah,
Riaz
media.
Naiku's reign of terror, this was the first time Kashmiri people saw these videos on WhatsApp, ISIS-style killings. I think that changed the tide that time because for us, हमारे लिए uh, even Kashmiris who went across trained the Pakistan. It's there in their books also. They never the Pakistani militants, the terrorists, never trust the Kashmiri militants. There is not the trust deficit is there. If you read books on the Pulwama bombing, if you see Umar Alvi, never actually trusted the overground workers, the Kashmiri overground workers. Try to do things on his own, try to put it together. So then to see these ISIS style killings for the first time, हमारे WhatsApp में, we were like, हमारे बच्चों को हो क्या गया है? How can they just behead somebody? How can they just, they're asking these, informer kind of वो आ रहे थे videos कि आप ऐसे ऐसे मुखबिरी करते हैं, and then, Lieutenant Umar Fayaz being killed. That
That
I
was
remember the rage in
terrible.
his hometown. Aurangzeb being killed, Rifleman Aurangzeb being killed, and these are the things that changed it. That changed it for the Kashmiri people. कि नहीं, हमारे अपने बच्चे हैवान बन रहे हैं. And this is not the kind of Islam that we were taught. Absolutely not. And credit to Kashmiris, we still have that, that Shaivism हमारे में है, that Sufistic thing that we have, the Rishi. हमारा तो we have the patron saint is Nund Rishi, and it's he's taught, and he's still taught to our children, whether it is in academia, whether it is a folklore or myths or legends or anything. We have this very moderate liberal kind of Islam that we have, and to see these youngsters, parroting the ISIS rhetoric, Hamas rhetoric, Hizbul Mujahideen rhetoric, Al Qaeda rhetoric, it was horrendous. I mean, eventually, the parents had to take a step, and hopefully, things will change. But it will take time. It will take a lot of time.
So coming
There's a lot of
towards
money
now,
being poured in. A lot of money being poured in for this.
coming towards closing this particular, we could talk about this for hours because it's such an interesting
Yes, we
subject,
could.
and I think we're having a wonderful conversation, great connect, and I'm going to take you up for this because this is something that we'll have to look at time and time again to see क्या change हुआ है, क्या change हुआ है, क्या change हुआ है. uh, the interesting thing that I look at, and which I want to take the conversation to right now, is that yeah, we will do question and answers, don't worry. People are asking यार question कब करेगा, करेंगे, don't worry. It's a Sunday afternoon podcast यार, थोड़ा सा लंबा चल रहा है तो कोई बात नहीं. Now, when we are talking about the setup of Kashmir as per se, आज जो चीज देख रहे हो, आज आप देख रहे हो, there is a इंफॉर्मेशन ओवरलोड फॉर दोज पीपल. ठीक है, इतने टाइम तक तो इंटरनेट बंद होता था, कभी ये होता था. पीपल नेवर ट्रस्टेड इट, राइट? People never trusted the information and this and that. Now that the information comes to their mobile phone, people have started saying, यार ये मेरी अपनी रिसर्च है, मैं अपने आप पढ़ रहा हूँ. So they get this thing.
Plus,
How
they
do you
can
think?
compare it, alternate wala.
Yeah.
Something
How do
coming
you
from
think
Pakistan, they can always check it with an Indian site. They can check it with a foreign site. You know, earlier it used to be one-sided. So today they can
how,
check alternate checks.
how do you think this is impacting the thought process of the people who are under 25 today? Because ये under 25 वाले जो बच्चे हैं, they're very critical at the end of it, because since they've been born, they've seen a gun one way or the other. Are they beginning to question what happened in their bachpan, or is it just going to be a, you know?
Again, it matters what family values are being taught. जिसको रिसर्च करनी है, जिसको कंपैरिजन करना है, एनालाइज खुद करना है, वो सारा पढ़ेगा, राइट? वो राइट भी देखेगा, लेफ्ट भी देखेगा, सेंटर का भी देखेगा. ही विल डू इट एंड देन कंपेयर विद हिज और हर पर्सनल एक्सपीरियंसेस एंड फॉर्मुलेट अ काइंड ऑफ आइडिया. बट जिसका ऑलरेडी फैमिली में ये बोला गया है, पढ़ा रहे हैं, बता रहे हैं कि इंडिया ने ऑक्यूपाई कर रखा है, वो वही वाले साइट्स चूज करेगा. कॉन्फर्मेशन बायस करता रहेगा कि yes, it is occupied. He will pick up only that kind of media. Like you have all of these channels, DW is there, and then Turkish media is there, and you have the अब तो Chinese media भी आ गया है. You have Washington Post, you have New York Times, you have our Rana Ayubs and the Arfa Khanam Sherwanis and the Sabah Naqvis and all. So they will go to Zubair and all. They will go to those sites only, and they will pick up only that. लेकिन जिसका खोया है, the people who've actually, the families we've lost, and today they are at a point to see what we lost. They are making sure that their children will form their own opinions, critical thinking, and that is happening. Slow pace pay, no quick fix solution. It's not going to happen overnight. It will take, as you said, it will take a decade at least before we are able to come up with a generation which is openly asking and saying, yes, I think my parents were involved in the ethnic cleansing of Kashmiri Pandits, but at the same time, secular Muslims were also targeted. I think it was a kind of strain, Wahhabic strain that came to our land, and we destroyed two generations because of this. So, in a few years' time, you will have that kind of generation. बट अभी इट्स सिंपली कि वो यूथ की जो एनर्जी है वो चैनलाइज करनी है टू कंस्ट्रक्टिव थिंग्स. इट्स नॉट जस्ट स्पोर्ट्स एंड टूरिज्म जो ठीक हो रहा है, आपका सिनेमा वापस आ रहा है. बॉलीवुड मूवीज आर बीइंग शॉट, which means it's giving work to local talent. It's not taking not just Indians, it's taking Kashmiri youth as well. Modeling used to be a taboo thing. No son who could get up and tell his parents कि मुझे modeling में जाना है. Today it's become a up thing. Girls picking up music again. You can see girls moving in bikes on scooties and all that. So that takes time. And one person doing it influences 4 or 5 people, influences a group, and then the culture is coming up. The cafe cultures are coming back once more. You have हमारी cuisine बहुत popular है, and people experimenting with it. So all of this money that is coming in from the Emirates, from the Gulf money, used to be only for Wahhabism, but today it's for other constructive things also. Eventually, our industries are also developing. Whether it's cement or it's chip industry or as I said, research R&D is also developing. So ये सब भी हो रहा है. The only thing that India needs to be careful of, not to bring the old deadwood politicians back, and to continue what they're doing with the NIA. NIA is sweeping, वो जो आपका ऑपरेशन के बाद एक वो क्लीन स्वीप होता है ना कि कहीं आईडी तो नहीं है, माइन तो नहीं है, कुछ नहीं है. It is sweeping these departments in the government, in private sectors. आज भी I think वो Sajad Bazaz I think has been arrested or something for that, what I used to call the Intifada factory. वो करते रहना है. All these terror sympathizers who made millions in this conflict, they need to
There
be
you
clean.
go. There you
They,
go. That's
they
the
need to be
bottom line.
clean.
So
They
now
need to be clean.
it is very clear that, and I say this again and again, I've got a little flack and I'm going to say this again. The ideology of Islamism, radical Islamism, has got 80,000 things wrong to it. right? Let's face facts,
And it's failed. It's completely failed. If
right?
you my work is about that. Oliver Roy's book, Failure of Radical Political Islam. I have two Russian
Exactly.
authors. They have categorically एक country wise उन्हें दिया है कि radical political Islam में आपका कोई solution नहीं है, democratic solution नहीं है, day to day solution नहीं है. So Islamism, not Islam, completely separate.
Islamism. That's what I'm
हाँ,
saying.
Islamism,
So now,
right?
Islamism is what? And this is my last question to you, which is going to be a big one. So just bear with me. Islamism is what? Is the use of a particular ideology and a thought process which is
Is
not evolved with a certain time of today, which is what happens. As you go by, your cultures evolve, your religion evolves, your structure everything evolves, right? It's an evolution. So there is the radicalization gets stuck with the non-evolutionary part of that particular thought process, which is what I want to bring to. When you have a situation like that, it is easy to use that particular sect for whatever you want. And you very clearly mentioned it, that people were making money out of it.
there, they were.
That means this thing was used.
Yes.
It has its flaws. No, you've got to, and let me just give you a small example. आपके पास एक छोटा चोर है, आप जानते हो किसी को जो छोटी मोटी चोरी करता है, आपको पता है यार इसको लॉक शॉक खोलने आते हैं,
Hmm.
छोटी मोटी क्या वो इधर उधर 5-6 हज़ार रुपए की चोरी वोरी करता है एंड ऑल दैट स्टफ. अब आप उसको बोलते हो यार तेरे को लॉक खोलना आता है, मैं तेरे को बैंक के सामने ले गया, 5-6 हज़ार क्यों उड़ा रहा है, 5-10 लाख उड़ा.
Hmm.
His brain is as it is zonked, and you are now using him to do something bigger. So
Yes.
that's part one of my question. Part two of my question is, all this is a very male dominated setup,
Yes.
right? It's a very male dominated setup. Although there are women who are as radical as anybody else, so wo bhi hai. That I wonder why, but it's still there. Dusra, I find, to break this, there is only one solution. And you mentioned this, and I told you that it'll be my last question, and that's the women of Islam. I've been thinking about it for quite a while, and this is something that comes to me. This is my kind of takeaway from what you've kind of educated us today. So I'd like you to round up this wonderful discussion with your thoughts about this. These 2 points that I've kind of brought out.
Islamism is caliphate. And this was not the Prophet's idea. He never ever gave this idea. His last sermon is all about rights to women. He emphasizes in his last sermon that he gave, which people recorded at that time, that women need to be empowered, they need to be made equal. Unfortunately, what happened, how Islamism came about, and Islam was kind of hijacked, by Shariaism, which many Muslim authors have written about, is that 2 centuries later, these hadith were codified. Again, how were the hadith codified? They were all male ulama using Islam as a weapon in alliance with the caliph. Caliph would be the state, the political power, and this has happened time and time again in the Islamic world. If
Political
you
Islam.
take the Abbasid period, that was the first time that these hadith became codified, and ulama state alliance जिसको हम कहते हैं, जिस पे बहुत सारी स्कॉलरशिप आजकल आ रही है, ये सेकेंड टाइम हुआ फिर ऑटोमन एम्पायर में. ये आपके अरब लैंड्स में हुआ जब अरबिक रेनेसांस, जिसको नादा कहते हैं, नादा मूवमेंट चली थी. दिस वाज टू ब्रेक दिस उलेमा स्टेट अलायंस. This has happened time and again in, now Iran is picking it up. The Iranian women are picking it up. Afghani women are resisting. And time and again in the Muslim world, people have resisted it. इंडिया में अनफॉर्चुनेटली ये नहीं हुआ. होने लगा था, शुरू हुआ था, when Sir Syed had started saying that the Muslims need to be modernized and dreamt of Aligarh Muslim University. Unfortunately, Aligarh Muslim University became the birthplace of the idea that partitioned India, right? The two nation theory. Otherwise, Sir Syed's plan kind of was to modernize them, the Indian Muslims, and yes, he had this global thing, this Mughal thing in his mind, कि हम लोग wanted to go back to the old one, but at least he made them become educated. So it has happened time and again. So Islamism is the caliphate. Islamism is all about political power, and Islamism uses Islam, the verses in the Quran, it justifies those interpretations of capturing, of dominance, of superiority, of othering the non-Muslims, जो कि उस कोर मैसेज में नहीं है कहीं पे भी. So Islamism का ये है, and then Islamism, of course, since as I said, these were male ulama got together, gave us these dubious hadiths which talk about hijab and all that, which is never there in the message is never there, and it's become a patriarchal setup. It's a, what we call it, Asra and me call it the Walla Bros Club. You know, आप वल्ला वल्ला करते रह जाते हैं, आपका ये ब्रदर क्लब बन जाता है, एंड इसमें जो विमेन शरिया को डिफेंड करती हैं उनको इन चाहिए, दे वांट टू कम इन दैट क्लब. So they start attacking us reformers, because they want membership in that club. Jabki Sharia is very anti-women. I mean, why would my testimony be half? Why would I need two more people to corroborate what I'm saying? Why should my inheritance be half? Why should my punishment, the capital punishment that you have for adultery, if you see, usme bhi agar aap dekhoge stoning mein, when they want to stone the woman, she is supposed to dig a pit in which, it will be till here. She cannot dig herself out when the stones are coming. जबकि वही आदमी जो अडल्ट्री केस में ट्राई किया जा रहा है, पत्थर फेंके जा रहे हैं, he digs a pit only till his waist, and once the stones start coming, he can dig himself out. There is a very horrendous movie that I think your viewers should watch, is the stoning of Suraya M. This was a real incident which happened in 1980s in Iran. Fridoun Sahib Jam, Algerian Iranian journalist, French Algerian, happened to pass by that village, और day before ही सुरैया का ये हो चुका था, stoning हो चुकी थी उसकी death. How that story got out, how Surayya's aunt was able to give him that tape, that recorded tape, is a story in itself. So इसमें भी, even in the Sharia laws में भी, you can see we are fighting for UCC. Remember, Indian Muslim are fighting for UCC. So if you see those Sharia laws, they are heavily stacked against us. You will get arguments कि इसमें तो लेकिन औरतों का ये हुकूक है, उसको ये rights मिलते हैं, ये है वो है, but it's all obfuscation, like I call it, obscurantism, because the Muslim male is always going to navigate and negotiate and make it, whether it's divorce, whether it's custody, adoption, whether it is inheritance, they're always going to negotiate अपने फायदे में. The odds are heavily stacked against the Muslim woman. So what the Indian government should focus on, and Indian government means for the whole country, not just Kashmiris, look up, always watch out for the Muslim woman, because she is not empowered as yet. उसकी घर में अभी कोई agency नहीं है. Don't go by the elite class which appears on television, because your 80% women don't come on television. वो है ही नहीं कहीं, वो visible ही नहीं है. They are not in पर्दा, but they are not anywhere. उनकी voice ही नहीं है अभी. Don't go by the rhetoric which comes out with these glamorous women coming on, Muslim women coming in all their fashionable attire and saying India में तो freedoms हैं बिल्कुल, Islam is best preserved in India, लेकिन वो जो आपका जो lowest common denominator है, the Indian Muslim woman, वो चाहे कश्मीर की हो, चाहे नीचे तमिलनाडु में हो, चाहे गुजरात में हो, चाहे बंगाल में हो, she is not empowered as yet. Unless and until you remove that hold of Sharia. You need to give her those UCC laws. You need to make her equal as a Hindu counterpart is. Tabhi jaake, any change will come. So luckily for Kashmiri women, this happened when the article was nullified, and now we have IPC laws instead of the Ranveer Penal Code, right? But since the IPC still doesn't have those UCC laws, there is still a lot of work to be done. So the Indian Muslim woman, she needs to be empowered. This should be the 5-year plan for the government. This should be the 25-year plan for the government. This is the 21st century's actual, priority for the United Nations. I think they've made it mandatory. And if you see all over the revolutions happening in Iran and Afghanistan and Morocco and Tunisia and Turkey, Turkish women are fighting back. अगर आप एर्दोगन के इलेक्शंस देखोगे, it's 50-50. He didn't win a complete this. Half of the population was fighting back, and उसमें Turkish women are there in the forefront because they've tasted that freedom जो कमालिज्म ने उनको दी. They are not easily going to give it up. They are not easily going to give up those freedoms. And today, once the Kashmiri women have got that freedom to ride that scooty, to take off the hijab, to have her own startup, to have her own mobile phone to operate, she is not going to give up that freedom to any Kashmiri punk coming and saying that Islam. Ye, what was that? Kashmir banega Pakistan. Yeah, Kashmir ka matlab kya, la ilaha illallah, something like that. She is not going to give up that freedom. She's tasted that freedom now. But the state needs to ensure that it continues and not to get the Gupkar gang back. Absolutely not get that gang back.
Indeed,
I hope
and
this
that's.
answers your questions,
I mean,
Adi.
it's just a lot of thought because there is of course a very very hardline approach which is there, which is propagated, uh, and the interpretation of the time then to situations today is obviously going to be a chaotic one. Uh, Times and situations are different, and what was done then, 7th, 8th century, 6th, 7th, 8th century, is something which is not going to be there today. It's a totally different game, and I guess that's the whole thing. It's a misfit of I think a whole thought process which has gone completely sideways. So that's something that I'd like to say. Let's get into some questions. We'll roll through the questions. There's loads of comments, so request you will just kind of to take more and more people in. Just short, crisp answers so that we can take as many as possible. The you know the most interesting thing which I want to say before I get into it. By the way, guys, सबसे important है, like शाइक तो कर दो यार. That has to happen. 154 likes is what we have. We need to take it up beyond 200, which is our dev talk standards. So वो तो करना ही करना है. Please like the video ताकि we can reach a larger audience and get feedback. This is one of the first sessions I've had on this kind of a topic. I want to see, without getting into the cat fighting, can we have a discussion on a sensitive subject like this? So that's something which I'm trying to do. Let's see how it actually comes out, because most of the time when you have a discussion on this sort, it gets into that whole cat fight, and that's where the thing kind of when I say cat fight, it's literally yeah, wo, acquisitions and this and that. It just goes down the tube after that, and
Well,
it
any
doesn't.
Kashmiri woman from the Intifada factory, if she kind of sits across me, there would definitely have been a cat
No, I'm
fight.
sure, I'm sure, but then you need to also have conversations where we may disagree on something. That's perfectly all right. It's perfectly all right. We don't need to fight. We still need to listen to each other and see, okay, fine, you got your opinion, I have mine. That's okay. It's perfectly all right. And that's how a, a country will only progress. Right. And I want to say,
Eventually, the talk is happening so that we come up with a constructive solution, right? If we keep canceling each other, तो solution कहाँ से निकल आएगा?
see, दूसरा है, see, every religion is old. Okay. Hinduism goes thousands, tens of thousands of years. But today, the interpretation is of more suited to today's time. That's why there is no clashes, right? You don't have two sects of Hinduism fighting with each other because the interpretation has been brought to the modern world. And that's called development, which is where there's been a gap, because I personally see history and I say, yeah, these Turks, when they actually came and conquered Arabia, they stopped all development, all critical thought. Sab band karo. But no books
Yes.
written, no painting, chanting, sab chup. So Islam basically lost 600 years of development, right? And what we see today is a bad example of something gone completely sideways, and the
Basically, what people
ideology
need to
being.
also remember is that Arab culture didn't have its own civilization. It was just tribes who got together under the leadership of one person who gave them a message, fine. But then, as happens in tribal societies, धीरे धीरे the religion also evolved. And once the kings, the caliphs got a taste of it, the power, they ossified that. ठीक है ना? What I call the state ulama alliance. What you need to understand is, as they started conquering lands, they started taking in the inventions, the achievements of those lands, and started evolving as well. So Islam is not a monolith. Islam followed in the Balkan states is completely different from the Islam followed in North America or Canada today. is completely different from the Islam followed in Indian subcontinent. Completely different from Islam followed in Indonesia and Malaysia and the Middle East. So it did, evolve as you said. The problem is when we have these Wahhabis and Salafis saying that you need to go back to that 7th century Arabia, जिसका अपना खुद का कोई culture था ही नहीं. How can you go back to that? It has evolved. Islam came to India, it evolved. It picked up these fundamentals and principles from Hinduism and it evolved into its own thing. If you go down south, you would be amazed to see these statues of Hazrat Ali, of Lady Maryam, of Lady Aisha. They have statues. But then, we have this takfiri terrorism where they say ki they are not Muslim enough. Like APJ Abdul Kalam is your best example. The radical ones say he's not Muslim, right? That's takfirism, pronouncing him as not Muslim. Whereas for millions of Muslims, I know from personally, a lot of them say he's an inspiration. He's the best example of an integrated Indic Muslim. And we need more and more of that. Our missile man. I mean, after all, he gave us the best defense possible, right? It came from a Muslim man, and that's something to be really proud of. Pakistanis
Yeah,
were pissed off
yeah.
when
I'm glad
when
there
he
are
did
such
that.
examples. Otherwise, the entire discussion just goes completely bad. I'm glad there are such examples. Anyways, let's see what the audience has to say. So I'm gonna start my race now. All right. Jagpreet ji, first comment from you. Adi ji, their call is that Sri Lanka should remain a union territory, by that Kashmir should be made a state.
No, I'll take it forward in the sense that Jammu residents need to be listened to. Like I said, Ladakhis were listened to. I'm glad for them. Jammu people have these complaints that we are tied up unnecessarily with Kashmir. The valley should have been trifurcated. I think Jammu लोगों की बात सुनना ज़्यादा जरूरी है. ये मेरे को नहीं पता कि ये कितना feasible है. श्रीनगर को union territory and rest of it as a state नहीं. I'm just saying what is the ground thing because a lot of administrative work is being done well. कि स्टेटहुड अगर आप ले आए और आपने इलेक्शंस कर दिए उसमें अभी भी आपके पुराने पॉलिटिशियंस ही हैं जो स्टेट को लूटने का ही काम करते हैं हमेशा और हाफ सेपरेटिज्म करते हैं. हाफ सेपरेटिज्म का मतलब है टेरर ग्रुप्स के सिंपथाइजर्स होना, हुर्रियत को मेन स्ट्रीम में लाना, ये सब होता है. हमें फ्रेश पॉलिटिशियंस चाहिए और अभी हमारे लड़के छोटे हैं, अभी उनके पास पॉलिटिकल अक्यूमन इतना सारा नहीं है. एंड टिल दैट हैपेंस I would suggest leave it as a union territory and keep the lieutenant governor. He's doing a fantastic job.
MK Sundaram Saab says, in my view, a comprehensive solution can only be achieved by completely dismantling the connection between individuals involved in terrorism and politicians. I think
That is
you've kind of.
happening. That is happening. NIA is doing it. If you see, Jamaat-e-Islami was banned a few years ago. All properties of Jamaat-Islami are being attached. Every other week, we keep having this news. If you follow Kashmir, NIA attaches this property, NIA attaches the property of this militant family. And today, as there was this news, all the intifada, those embedded separatists in media, in academics, in economics, in all fields, they are being identified and arrested, charged. So that is happening. वो individuals are being separated from the terrorism. वो हो रहा है. And दूसरों को message भी जा रही है.
Exactly our last point, which he said, problems and radical ideology of Jannah politics just take advantage of them. Iranian revolution led to the Wahhabism in the Middle East. So, I mean, something really bad, take advantage and
हाँ.
shoot it. That's just about
उसके
it.
लिए फिर the Indian Muslims have to be, trusted that they will agree कि there are radical interpretations. वो
Hmm.
space अभी Muslim world में उसका काम हो रहा है. It's not just about Indian Muslims. वो critical thinking, we used to have it in the Abbasid time where philosophers and thinkers and rationalists they used to say कि कहीं कहीं पे problematic verse तो है. आज के जमाने में there are certain anti-Semitic verses in the Quran. इसके लिए आपको देना पड़ेगा वो space. लेकिन हमारे यहाँ स्टेट भी हेजिटेट करती है, वो ब्लास्फेमी के उस बॉर्डर में चली जाती है. अगर स्टेट की तरफ से एंड आई स्पीक टू प्रोग्रेसिव मुस्लिम्स ऑल ओवर द कंट्री, दे कीप सेइंग द स्टेट हैज टू डू इट. द स्टेट नीड्स टू पुट इट्स फुट डाउन. द स्टेट नीड्स टू क्रिएट दैट स्पेस कि जहां पे
No,
एटलीस्ट दैट क्रिटिसिज्म, दैट क्रिटिकल एडिशन ऑफ द कुरान कुड कम इन. बट आई नो द स्टेट विल नॉट डू इट. It hasn't done
no,
it.
it
It
should
won't
not.
do it.
It should not be done. I don't think the state needs to get inside this.
State would mean like funding those educational establishments,
You do
funding
that.
those
Fair enough. You
organizations,
support the structure, protect the
and
structure, but let them
support
do
a
their own thought
critically
process.
thinking structure. That's what they mean by the state has to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen the TV debates. Those
Yeah.
Shoaib Jamai kind of people coming on TV
I
and
wonder why they
spewing all
even
that.
bring those
The
morons. I
state
mean, I'm
could
sorry, but
have, जो भी channels है, जो भी कुछ है, but एक वो critical thinking space, क्योंकि इसमें उन Muslims जो बहुत इस पर बात करते हैं, उनके लिए safety बहुत जरूरी है. वो इसीलिए
Hmm.
आगे नहीं आते हैं. उनको पता है कि
True.
safe नहीं है.
What is the current reaction with political landscape, the Abdullahs and the Muftis?
Irrelevant, and I don't know why the Indian mainstream media gives them relevance. Why are they even taking quotes from Mehbooba Mufti and Abdullah? Abhi Ghulam Nabi Azad said this very much needed statement. However opportunistic he might be, he did say कि we were all Hindus. ठीक है ना? महबूबा मुफ्ती जी ने उसका रिएक्शन बड़ा sarcastically किया कि अगर वो थोड़ा और भी पीछे जाएं तो शायद उनको बंदर बंदर भी मिलेंगे, which is a fact. Evolutionary biology. I mean, she should get enrolled in the Islamic University of Science and Technology at Avantipur in Kashmir. If she really needs to study evolutionary biology. They are irrelevant. Shouldn't even be asked for quotes. I think after Article 370 was nullified 2019 में जब उन लोगों का house arrest था, we had the peaceful 18 months of that when they were under house arrest. Abhi, because India has to have its democratic credentials, so they have been let off. बट इनका कुछ नहीं है, इनके पास कोई प्लान नहीं है डेवलपमेंट का, गवर्नेंस का, एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन का, करप्शन के बारे में क्या करना है, लॉज के बारे में क्या करना है. दे हैव नॉट, दे आर जस्ट फॉर पावर ग्रैब. दीज आर डायनास्टिक पॉलिटिशियंस एंड दीज फैमिलीज आर ऑब्सोलीट. बट वो मेन स्ट्रीम उनको रेलेवेंट कर रहा है. अदरवाइज व्हाई वुड यू इवन नीड टू गो एंड कोट हर?
Yeah.
हाँ.
Should we be worried about the influx of Uyghur people into Kashmir, keeping in mind the entry of Rohingyas has been problematic?
I don't think so. Adi, this is your area. I don't think the Uyghurs are coming here. हाँ, रोहिंग्यास का problem था जो
Hardly.
जम्मू में बस गए थे. I think the state is kind of starting their data and all of that record thing. Um, Rohingyas are a problem in Jammu area because as we discussed in the last podcast, they walked all the way, leaving all those states and settling down in the most troublesome area. So that was a red flag for us. कि ये हो क्या रहा है?
They were
Kind of a
brought there.
demographic change or
They
something.
were
Yeah.
brought there. They were
But
brought there.
Uyghur, I don't think so. Adi, this is your area.
They're not. They're settling down in the north of Pakistan. As a matter of fact, in the northern parts of
Uh,
they've infiltrated into uh, northern regions of Gilgit Baltistan and all that area because they're preparing into China. So
and I think India's immigration laws are getting tougher, right?
yeah, yeah. It's gonna see again this whole rot that is there. It's gonna take time. It's not something we as Indians, Bharatiya citizens, Indian citizens, we've started expecting too much too fast.
नहीं, हमारा
So
एथोस ही है ना. वी हैव गिवन
हाँ,
रेफ्यूज टू एंशिएंट टाइम से. पारसीज को दिया, तिब्बतन्स हमारे यहाँ हैं, बलोची हमारे यहाँ, अफगानीज हैं, इतने सारे सिद्दी यमनीज settled in the south. These are Muslims from Yemen.
yeah, yeah,
बट हमारा ये इथोस ही रहा है. लेकिन
yeah,
अब एंड वी आर लर्निंग फ्रॉम यूरोप. यूरोप भी थोड़ा टफ हो रहा है इमिग्रेशन लॉज पे, तो वील हैव टू. हमारे बॉर्डर्स अब इतने पोरस नहीं रह सकते.
yeah.
Especially this Seema Heather case which came.
The real history has been written by left liberals, so our education system was totally disrupted, and also political parties are allowed to do that for the sake of appeasement.
Yes. Like I said, appeasement politics has to go. Vote bank politics has to go. इसका सबसे बड़ा एग्जांपल आपका 1984 शाबानो केस था. You know what the Congress did. I hope the BJP doesn't do this. बीजेपी बीच बीच में करता है appeasement politics, पता है, लेकिन I understand the predicament also. It has a country to run. But
You
yes,
can't
completely
be with
agree
a
with this
sword all
statement.
the time. Yeah, it's quite difficult to actually take out the sword all the time. A compliment, one of many compliments for you. Please have Miss Malik more often. Always found her
Thank you.
inspirational and honest. One of many compliments, if I may say so.
Thank you.
I mean, people have
Good to know.
so many people. Good conversation, more shows leaded like this one. So there's loads of this thing. Shubham Agrawal, thank you so much for your contribution. But can you mail me? I'll send you a whole list of China books for you to read, as many as many as you want. This is a quite a comment that I read online quite often. Any comments on
Well,
this?
let me educate the
Secular
person
Muslim
writing
versus
secular
oxymoron.
Muslim is an oxymoron. There are agnostic Muslims for your kind information. There are atheist Muslims as well. There are cultural Muslims. I am one cultural Muslim. I am agnostic as well. There you have liberal Muslims. You have rationalist Muslims. There are so many kinds of Muslims. उसके साथ साथ आपके एक्सट्रीमिस्ट मुस्लिम्स भी हैं, रैडिकल मुस्लिम अलग हैं, कंजर्वेटिव मुस्लिम्स अलग हैं. कंजर्वेटिव मुस्लिम्स के साथ आपको कोई शिकायत नहीं होनी चाहिए. कंजर्वेटिव मुस्लिम्स अपना वो 5 वक्त नमाज, अपना वो 5 पिलर्स ऑफ इस्लाम मानते हैं, ज्यादा मॉडर्न नहीं है, लेकिन उनको हिंदुओं के साथ रहने में कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. वो आपका कंजर्वेटिव मुसलमान है. तो बहुत तरीके के मुसलमान हैं. सेकुलर तो ऑब्वियसली है ही. सेकुलर का मतलब है वो अपने इस्लाम को पब्लिक में नहीं लाते हैं. That would be a secular Muslim. So it's not an oxymoron. You have atheist Muslim as well, a Muslim who identifies as a Muslim but doesn't believe in Islam. Your best example is Jim Khalili. He's an Iraqi Brit and he wrote this book House of Wisdom. और उन्होंने ये अब सारे सर्कल्स में एकदम मेन स्ट्रीम कर दिया कि सारा का सारा जो इस्लामिक साइंस है इट ओव्स itself to the Indic civilization, Indian civilization, Hindu civilization. क्यों? क्योंकि एक तो आर्यभट्टा जी ने जीरो दिया, दूसरा जो हमने अडॉप्ट किया हिंदू न्यूमरल सिस्टम. तो यू विल हैव टू बी थैंकफुल टू जिम खलीली who is an atheist Muslim who has made it mainstream in all academic circles all over the world कि Islamic science owes itself to the Hindu civilization. उसकी बेस्ट एग्जाम्पल है द एलिफेंट क्लॉक. इट हैज टेक्नोलॉजी फ्रॉम 5 डिफरेंट सिविलाइजेशंस. दैट वुड बी द ग्रीक सिविलाइजेशन, द चाइनीज सिविलाइजेशन, पर्शियन सिविलाइजेशन, इस्लामिक अरबिक सिविलाइजेशन एंड इंडियन सिविलाइजेशन. एलिफेंट क्लॉक उसका रेप्लिका दुबई मॉल में बना है. उसको गूगल कीजिए और जिम खलीली को आप देख सकते हैं नेटफ्लिक्स पे. वो कक ऑफ द अर्थ करके एक सीरीज आती है. उसका स्पेशली जो एपिसोड 2 है इस्लाम के बारे में, यू विल लव हाउ ही मेक्स फन of all the Abrahamic religions. तो ये है. Secular Muslims are there,
You
obviously.
know, I'll ask you this one thing, and a lot of the comments, I'm just gonna. There's so many comments about this, and I just kind of want to combine all of them together. And trust you me, a lot of people who will you'll recognize me. So a lot of people say, yeah, this ideology itself has had so much of hardline this thing in it. There's this ISIS which has come out, there's this which has come out, there's that which has come out. So there is a problem. Okay?
There
There
is
is
a
an
problem.
issue there. Okay? There is also a personal interpretation. Every Maulana who comes out and says he decides to do it in his own way.
हाँ.
अब वो
आला
हर कोई शुरू हो
आला
जाता है.
हजरात. We
हाँ,
call them
वो
the
हर
आला
कोई शुरू हो
हजरात.
जाता है. So that is perfectly all right. Okay, ठीक है यार, आपका है, आप जो मर्जी करिए. There's no problem. My point that I'm trying to say is there has to be the realization amongst the followers that listen, we are becoming outcasts in the world if we continue like this,
It is there.
right? That, and what is also happening is that our media, and I blame this completely to the media, there is a sect of people that call themselves ex-Muslims who talk about a complete, the deepest darkest secrets will be brought out there,
Right.
and those are true. I'm not saying at
Yes.
any point of time they're not.
Absolutely.
They're
Yes.
100% true, and terrible things have happened. I pity them, and I've seen some of those things. Don't have the heart to watch the whole thing sometimes. Then you've got the
I'm
TV.
documenting those things. I'm
Yeah,
documenting all of them.
it's terrible. I mean, and then you have the TV, where you have no reasonable voice which is brought up to speak. So what is the perception that has gone down? Here is a thing that will never improve, that doesn't want to improve, and do what you want to. There is nobody who's straight. That's my final question to you. How would you kind of put this across
I
to
blame the
people?
media. Like I said, there's a lot of things happening. आपका इतना सारा underground movement चल रहा है Arabic world में ही. Richard Dawkins' God Delusion is the most downloaded book in Arabic, right? इतने सारे लोग क्यों पढ़ रहे हैं? You have so many people working for reform. रैफ बादावी का तो हाई प्रोफाइल केस था. बहुत सारे लो प्रोफाइल केसेस भी हैं where even the Middle East felt itself after the Arab Spring that it had to change. Like you said, they were getting complete bad PR all across the world. क्योंकि आर्गुमेंट तो यही है कि इतने सारे ग्रुप्स गलत तो नहीं हो सकते ना अबाउट
Okay,
द
I think
इंटरप्रिटेशंस.
she's had a bit
बोको
of a
हराम,
internet glitch.
आइसिस, हमास, हिजबुल मुजाहिदीन, अल कायदा,
uh,
लश्कर ए तैयबा, इतने सारे ग्रुप्स हमेशा इसी इंटरप्रिटेशन में क्यों आते हैं?
I'll have
समथिंग
to
इज
ask
रॉन्ग
you
हो
to
गया था।
rewind. I'm sorry, I'll have to ask you to rewind. You got cut off in the middle. You were at the Middle East part, and I lost you for there for about 30 seconds. So can I request
There's
you?
a lot of things happening, there's a lot of change happening, a lot of questioning happening, चाहे वो मिडिल ईस्ट में हो रहा हो, चाहे वो वेस्ट में हो रहा हो जहां पे मुस्लिम सेटल्ड हैं, यूरोपियन सिटीज में, नॉर्थ अमेरिका, कनाडा में, चाहे इवन इंडियन सब कॉन्टिनेंट में, बिकॉज एज आई सेड द हिंदू राइट विंग इज मेकिंग श्योर दैट द मुस्लिम स्टार्ट फेसिंग देयर अनकंफर्टेबल ट्रूथ्स। तो हो रहा है। प्रॉब्लम वही है आदि, व्हाट यू सेड, मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया जर्नलिज्म इज नॉट डूइंग इट्स जॉब। जर्नलिज्म हैज टू लुक फॉर पीपल लाइक मी। Journalism has to make those conducive atmosphere for a panel talk like we are having today. Journalism has to do it, and unfortunately journalism negative पे ही चलता है, TRP ratings पे, otherwise they could easily pick up rationalist Muslims। तो काफी सारा हो रहा है, एंड ये मीडिया ही उनको सामने ला सकती है। जैसे मैंने जिम खलीली का कहा, ही इज देयर ऑन ओटीटी प्लेटफॉर्म्स, ठीक है ना। इसी तरह आपके मिडिल ईस्ट में है बहुत सारे ऐसे, आपकी इतनी सारी बुक्स डाउनलोड हो रही है, क्रिटिकल थिंकिंग स्पेसेस बन रहे हैं। ये आपको केवल सोशल मीडिया में नहीं दिखाई देगा, अरब टेलीविजन को ही देख लीजिए। नाउ देयर आर काउंटर्स टू दोस सिली स्टूपिड आर्गुमेंट्स वेयर यू हैव दिस मौलाना सेइंग अर्थ इज फ्लैट, why do we need to go to the moon is already been there, all of these stupid things। women की ड्राइविंग करने से उनकी ओवरीज पे फर्क पड़ता है, it's being countered now। पहले काउंटर नहीं था, लेकिन it is journalism, media's job to bring them forth। तो हो रहा है, बहुत कुछ हो रहा है, लॉट ऑफ इट इज हैपनिंग। आई एम इन द मिडल ऑफ ऑल ऑफ दैट, आई एम डॉक्यूमेंटिंग एवरीथिंग। 56 मुस्लिम मेजॉरिटी कंट्रीज, हर किसी में अगर एक एक्सट्रीमिस्ट टेरर ग्रुप ऑपरेट कर रहा है, उसके साथ साथ रिफॉर्म भी हो रहा है। इंडोनेशिया brought together all of its reformers when it started understanding कि अल कायदा का इन्फ्लुएंस बढ़ रहा है, and it made all the ulama in the country to come together and develop something called Islam Nusantara। I have written about it. I am still documenting it and writing it। आपके दोवाल जी गए थे यहाँ के मुस्लिम ग्रुप्स लेके इंडोनेशिया लास्ट ईयर, एक डेलीगेशन गया था जिसमें आपके शाह फैसल भी थे, एंड वहां पे उन्होंने एक पूरा वर्कशॉप, इंटरफेथ वर्कशॉप किया, वेयर दिस इस्लाम नुसंतरा वाज स्टडीड, सो दैट रेप्लिका कैन बी डन इन इंडिया। तो हो रहा है, काम बहुत लेवल पे हो रहा है। जर्नलिज्म हैज टू डू इट्स जॉब।
Sheikh Alisa also had come here, which was
Yes,
a
that was
very,
part of
very,
that।
yeah, that was part of that. A lot of people
And this
missed
was
it.
our idea, progressive Muslims ka idea thi, start bringing in people, progressive Muslims, progressive authors, progressive scholars from the Arabic world, from the Muslim world, and start mainstreaming them, to the Indian subcontinent। क्योंकि Indian subcontinent में हमारे को जो स्ट्रैंगल होल्ड है, वो एक तो ऑल इंडिया मुस्लिम पर्सनल लॉ बोर्ड का है, दूसरा देवबंद बरेलवी स्कूल ऑफ थॉट का है, और अलीगढ़ मुस्लिम यूनिवर्सिटी का है, उस्मानिया जामिया का है, एंड देन आपके जो ये एजेंडा एक्टिविस्ट हैं, अरफाज एंड रानाज एंड ऑल दैट, ये सारे का स्ट्रैंगल होल्ड तोड़ने के लिए व्हाट यू हैव टू डू, यू टू कनेक्ट विद द प्रोग्रेसिव वंस इन द मुस्लिम वर्ल्ड ऑल अक्रॉस द वर्ल्ड। तो ये हो सकता है, गवर्नमेंट कैन इजीली डू इट। सऊदी ने अब जाके वो लॉ किया कि उनके जो औरतें हज पे जा रही है, दे डोंट रिक्वायर अ मेल एस्कॉर्ट। हम तो पहले से ही विदाउट मेल एस्कॉर्ट जा रहे थे, इंडियन मुस्लिम तो जा रहे थे, कश्मीरीज वर गोइंग विदाउट एस्कॉर्ट्स, विमेन वर गोइंग अलोन। वो तो अब जाके उनका वो लॉ आया है, सो वी वर मोर
So
प्रोग्रेसिव पहले।
why?
अनफॉर्चुनेटली एक ही मामले में हम पीछे थे, दैट वाज द ट्रिपल तलाक, राइट। बड़ी लानत की बात थी, शर्म की बात थी कि पाकिस्तान में बैन था। दिस वाज समथिंग द पाकिस्तानीज यूज्ड टू टेल अस, अरे जाइए, इंडिया का बोल रहे हैं आप, हमारे यहाँ ट्रिपल तलाक बैंड है, आपके यहाँ अभी भी है। सो दिस वाज वन आर्गुमेंट वी कुड नॉट विन, फाइनली वी आर विनिंग इट।
That time takes I think realization takes time, but I guess realization has come. I'd request you, if you just message me your books, your work, your writings, your blog, just
Okay,
message me the links. I'll put it down here. A lot of people have asked for it, and I'm sure a lot of people will read it. uh, Thank you so much. And just before we finish, Mr. Raghuram, thank you so much for that super sticker. uh, I am grateful that you've had this time and you've had given me this open conversation. It's a tough
always।
subject to talk about, and it's a tough subject to talk about without getting into these semantics. And I think our first conversation, if you remember, we had a long 45-minute conversation where we decided, and I requested you, I don't want to get in those semantics. I want to talk about the larger strategic picture. and that is where
No
the
tactical,
solution lives.
strategic, right? I remember that.
Strategic picture, yeah.
Strategic
So
picture.
thank you for keeping it like that. I mean, because when people get into, oh उसमें यहाँ पर क्या हुआ था, उसमें ये हुआ था, फिर खत्म. You're stuck in those situations. Till the time you don't look at things from a higher perspective, from a little broader perspective, you will not be able to make sense and do anything forward. So thank you so much. It's a pleasure talking to you. I'm going to connect with you soon for another interesting podcast. Till then,
Always.
Jai.
Jai Hind.